Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again from Film Fanatic headquarters. It's about 10:34 on a Saturday. Pretty cold day here in Maine. Well, I always love to give a shout out to people who've been supporting this channel. The likes, people have been subscribing to the channel more and more, so it's been very cool. I really appreciate it, and people have been commenting more and more on on each show. And it's super cool. Like if lately the trend for what I've been doing is bringing a lot of movies to the table that I've you know took where I took a chance and have lucked out with seeing so many great films that are just incredibly awesome. And one of the compliments I've gotten from a few folks, or some of the comments I've been getting from folks, is that they obviously seem to be fans of movies and they're particularly attracted to horror and science fiction, and they've been digging the coverage of some obscure films they might not have ever seen. And I actually had a couple of people say that they've been watching the videos and they make these little lists, and then they've been seeking out these movies, of all these films that they've never seen. And to me, that's just awesome. That's in a nutshell what I'm trying to do with this channel, for the most part. I try to mix things up and try to bring some variety to the channel with bigger Hollywood films and some specialty shows where I'll talk about maybe a music thing, or with the interview segments that I've been doing, or I'll just cover, say, a particular director. Like I did a show on Stanley Kubrick, my favorite director of all time. I also did a big show a while back on my favorite movie of all time, The Godfather. I've done a show on film scores and soundtracks, so I try to mix it up. But the main focus is always kind of on a lot of these, pretty obscure, amazing and amazing horror exploitation movies. So it's been a lot of fun. So when people say that they're making little lists after they watch some of the videos and checking out a lot of movies they've never seen before, and they're open to that, to me that's that's the best compliment. And again, these movies always have such a resonance with me. They continually always inspire me, um, just in general, but then especially around the weird music that I create around my band Quantum. I talk about it a lot, but my biggest source of inspiration for that band is definitely films, around all things that entails, everything from the direction of a film, the the pacing of a film, the editing, especially the music of a particular movie, the aesthetics, like how the theatrical world is put together. It's just an endless source of inspiration for me. So along out obviously with quote unquote bands and albums and particular genres of music, which are an obvious huge source of inspiration. Movies continually become more and more of an influence on the band, and so it's to me it's um, all like the same branch under the same tree kind of thing. It's all like interconnected. And it's funny. I like was thinking about that this morning, where certain artists don't. I've talked to many different friends and singer songwriters that I know, in various styles, about how they, what their process is and what they go through when they, you know, when they're in that creative state. And it's always so interesting to hear the diversity of how people kind of function in that area of where they're creating things. You have some people where I've talked to where when they're in that creative process, they basically kind of shut the world off and they just are focused on the self and their own thing. they don't tend to maybe listen to. I've talked about that specifically with one person in particular, where when they're in that creative process or they're feeling that kind of creative spark, they literally turn off the world around them and they don't listen to very much music. They don't really, you know, check this or that out. They just kind of, once they have a kernel of an idea that they feel has something special to it, they just sit basically in the dark and craft that and work and work and work on it. And usually when they're out of that space is when they'll be listening to music and soaking up things that they really love. And I always find that interesting. And then you have artists too, where you hear a band, where they might be, well, to a degree, ripping off other artists, like a particular sound or a style, and they'll basically copy what's going on in that whole kind of world, and try to replicate it. And it's that to me is kind of like an extreme thing of that, or example of that. Like one example I can think of, and she was very very popular back, well, quite a few years ago, and she still is popular, but especially back, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. But there's a singer songwriter, Cat Power, who's like a folk artist, folk rock artist, really great. Her first few albums are amazing. Her stuff's very, kind of melancholy, but I noticed there was a trend where there was a lot of singer songwriters, female, mostly female artists that were very much taking on that sound, or almost to a degree, because it was a very popular sound and kind of aesthetic. They were to a degree almost kind of copying that or like replicating that, and and whether that's like a full on like conscious move to do that or not, it is what it is. And so to a degree that stuff can be fit, very much put into a box or a label and kind of appeal to that audience, where it's very very obvious, and people who love that kind of sound will probably check that out, or that will be something that will be recommended to them because they'll like that. And that's kind of the extreme of where they'll, basically use a lot of the same production elements and they'll try to copy that. And for my own personal taste, I don't really, I'm not a fan of that. I love artists when they're doing something from, whether you like it or not. I mean, it could be something you don't really even like, but they might creatively have their own kind of sound or their own identity. And they don't really sound like, you can hear their influences or whatnot, but they don't really sound like anyone else. And to me, that's just like, and also I think music and art like that that's created that way, has is from a sincere place. It's not like I don't know, from a gimmicky kind of thing. It's from a sincere place. They're kind of doing something organic, and it feels really natural. I naturally always gravitate towards artists like that. And then you have artists too, where they it's always interesting too, because you have artists that have, you can hear their influences in their music, of what they're listening to, or what inspires them. And sometimes artists have a funny reaction to that, like in conversations that I've had with people around that, where they really want it. They don't want it to sound too much like this person or that person, and they kind of they sometimes have a conscious thing of where they try to curtail that a little bit, so it's not so obvious. Um, and they rather have somebody say, "Oh, I really like your stuff because it's your stuff." They don't want to. They don't want to necessarily hear those, in their presentation of the art. They don't want to hear their creative influences. Uh, so it's always interesting how people kind of perceive that. And for me, it's like when I'm in a creative space, and and I'm pretty envious because I work with a few musicians and artists that that are great friends, and they're so prolific. Like they're writing music constantly, almost every week. One example of that is this band I've been playing with for a while, for quite a few years now, Electric Bonfire. I've been playing with them for about 4 or 5 years, and it's a really great band. It's like psychedelic inspired kind of jam rock, but it's very singer songwriter driven, and it's a total blast. And but those guys are amazing because they continually, like literally every week, they have new material to present, and it's unbelievable how much material. Or how much original material they have. So like every week we're literally learning 2 or 3 new songs, and to me that's so inspiring. For me, I have written a lot of material over the years, and mostly with my band Quantum, but it comes and goes with the process. A lot of times where it's very different, where I'll have like an inspiration or some kind of kernel of an idea that I really like, and I've gone through bouts of where I'll like for maybe a month straight, I'll be writing a lot of material, and I'll be, kind of cranking out tunes, and things will kind of come together over, a relatively short amount of time. And then before I know it, I have another batch of songs. And that's pretty sporadic when it happens. But usually when it does happen, and I'm kind of feeling it, it usually leads to some pretty cool things. Helps me. It's easier for me to kind of develop ideas and to try to connect the dots and make hopefully quality material out of that. But usually for me, it's the process is very very sporadic, and there's long bouts of time of where I'm not really writing anything. I'm always working on the songs that I've had or that I have, and always kind of tweaking them and always trying to develop them. I'm always like looking at that stuff as a constant work in progress, but I'm always kind of tweaking those things. Um, and but most of the time when I write a new song, especially for Quantum, that's really the only music I write. It's an incredibly long process. Like there's a song that we just debuted. We had a gig about a week ago at this new venue that literally just opened up. It's called the Gypsy Rose Tavern in Camden, and it's a really awesome venue. It's really growing and growing. Amazing food. It's got a really great atmosphere, great acoustics, and but we played a show there pretty recently, and we debuted a new song there at the gig, and it was fun to be able to just kind of get it out there and see how it would go. And we rehearsed it a little bit before, and but very very new. And so we got to debut it and just to kind of test run it, and it seemed like it went pretty well. But that, for example, that song has has been in development for months and months and months. It started off with this keyboard, these chords that I had come up with, and I tried many different combinations with it, and I thought I kind of had something that was pretty good, and then tried to present it after I working on it for a while in rehearsal, and it just didn't really work. And then we kind of played it once, a kernel, like a little bit of that idea live, and it just didn't really work. And so I just kind of discarded it. But yet there were certain things about it that I really liked, and I thought it had some potential, but I just didn't know what it needed. And so it was like a process over a few months of where I was taking those basic ideas that I thought had some kind of depth to it, and I just throw all these different things at it and try all these different combinations and try this and try that. And then over a period of time, I started to come up with some additional things, and it became this song that we just played for the first time in public. But really, realistically, that whole process of getting that song to where it was like a presentable song, that whole process was going on for months. So that tends to be what happens for me, where I'll sit on an idea or a kernel of idea, or a group of ideas. Sometimes they'll occasionally they'll it will just click, and the thing will kind of evolve, and I'll have something right away. But generally it's just like picking away, picking away, picking away, throwing this at the canvas, throwing that at the canvas, seeing what sticks to the wall, seeing what falls away, seeing what makes sense. And it's constantly, it's always in this constant state of flux of trying all these different things. And most of the songs that I have for Quantum are from that process. So I'm always like, and I like that process. I like it because I can't really force anything, because that definitely doesn't work when I do that. So it has to, you know, just kind of like get into this process of where it's like a slow boil, and it has to eventually come to a full boil at some point on its own terms, while I'm trying different ingredients. But if I try to speed it up and try this and try that, I find that it doesn't work, and it ends up being an idea that's thrown away. So I'm always inspired, and honestly kind of envious when I have friends like, case in point, Electric Bonfire, where they just like crank out these songs all the time, and it's like, you know, in one day they'll write two songs, and then before you know it, the following week they have this material to present, and I just find that so inspiring and so awesome. And getting back to all the film stuff, you know, that's the biggest inspiration for me. As well as albums and definitely artists that I love. When I'm in that creative process too, I'm totally the opposite. Like when I have an idea or I'm writing music, I have even more of a thirst for checking out more music. I listen to more music when I'm in that process. I check out more and more bands. I watch more movies. I just soak up all those things. And I love it if somebody comes up, like some of the best compliments that I've had around the music is sometimes people will say, "Wow, that really reminds me of like a film score. That really reminds me of maybe like a horror soundtrack from the '80s, from an old '80s like slasher movie." Like to me, that's the best thing I can hear, and that's really great. And my music that I write, I know has like elements of where it has an appeal, but it's also got this fringe element, and sometimes that can be alienating for some people. So that's okay, that's just how it is. Um, and if people hear other influences in the music and they comment on it, I really appreciate that. I don't shy away from that, because I think it will always come out in its own way, in its own, kind of in its own light. But I love that. I remember one time somebody had said that they thought our music had this Herbie Hancock vibe to it. And Herbie Hancock, particularly Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters, Thrust, is like my favorite album of all time. And that's an album I've always been obsessed with, and I've taken so much inspiration, and also in a lot of ways lots of ideas, because that album, I look at that album, not only is it like just this killer jazz fusion album, but particularly around the keyboard uh, aspects of what Herbie was presenting on that album, where he's playing essentially, I feel like, a lot of like cutting edge electronic music, using all of these wild synths, and really exploring those textures, and and it's so highly innovative what he was doing as far as the electronics. So, and combining that with funk and jazz, like to me, that's like, uh, that album's always has always been an obsession of mine. It still is, and so when somebody says that they might hear that in my music, to me that's one of the nicest compliments. So yeah, and like I said, if people have that thing of where they say it reminds them of a film soundtrack, that to me is uh, the greatest compliment that somebody can give me. So that's a real, um, enriching example of feedback. Because that creative process is so different for so many people. It's, it runs the gamut. And I just think it's great when I get a chance to talk to people about that, and also how diverse that way of operating, or how diverse that process is for each person individually. Um, and but I've noticed over the years when I write music that I'm definitely checking out more things more when I'm in that space. Uh, for example, like another example of that would be, there was a long period of time of where I wasn't. I love, one of my favorite forms of music is hip hop and rap music, and for the most part, I tend to always listen to a lot of older hip hop stuff. I grew up, in the '80s and '90s, so I typically listen to a lot of uh, KRS One and Mos Def and Black Star, Nas. My favorite hip hop album of all time is Nas Illmatic, Biggie Smalls, um, even old school Beastie Boys, NWA, Dr. Dre, his first album, Snoop Dogg, his first album, Warren G. I really love that stuff. All the LA stuff, um, so much great stuff. There was a while where I wasn't listening. I didn't really check out a lot of the new stuff, a lot of newer hip hop that was coming out, and when I in passing, when I would hear newer artists in that particular field, I liked it, but I never really was, I don't know, in a place of where I was buying out those buying those albums and checking them out and diving a little bit deeper. Um, so, but the last year or two, I have been doing that, and it's been really great. And one of the last, it's funny, it's a funny story. One of the last like kind of hip hop rap obsessions that I got into, as far as kind of newer artists, was about 3 or 4 years ago. Uh, I got really into a few artists, and I was becoming really obsessed with one in particular. I got really into Lil Wayne, and I got this album of his, the Carter Three, and I really love that album. It's a real grimy, kind of dark, kind of hip hop album, but it's really good. It's got some killer production. It's really raw, and I got really obsessed with that album, and I was listening to that album constantly, and I ended up, using some of the ideas from this album for a track that I was writing, and it, because I was listening to this stuff all the time, it came out. This song that I came out, I felt that was like really inspired by that song. Some people might not hear that when they hear the song, but for me, it's like very much a part of that period. And then as far as new hip hop that I started really getting into, my favorite hip hop group right now, as far as new groups go, by far, is Run the Jewels. I love those guys to death. They're just amazing. I love the production on those albums. I love that they combine. It's really innovative stuff. I feel like they really combine lots of different elements. I hear uh, a little of electronic vibe to it. I definitely hear like an old school hip hop vibe. I hear like a trap music vibe to it. Kind of an ambient quality to it. Some of their stuff even reminds me a little bit of like the old school Prodigy stuff. It has that kind of vibe. But their production on their tracks and on their records is just amazing. So like I've written a few songs, a group of tunes lately over the last few months where I took direct inspiration, and it will never be as good as what they're doing, but I took direct inspiration from like their production and how they assemble and create these beats and these grooves and this palette. I kind of took all those ideas from those guys. And another group I really love a lot, and I really love his production, is Logic. He's another rapper who is, I think, awesome. He's one of my favorite rappers right now as far as new rappers. And then same kind of thing, you know. And then another example of an artist who I really got obsessed with is Dojo Cat. I really love Dojo Cat. Same kind of thing. I wrote a song that was very much influenced by her, and people on the outside might not hear that, but I, continually am like inspired by new things also. So I was trying to like cop a little bit of that feel into the newer material that I was writing, and I love that process. So when I'm writing music, I'm like, you know, diving into checking out more and more things, even more so. So it's always a fun and interesting process when you talk, on or how that process is when you talk to other artists and other musicians. I always think it's a um, fascinating uh, thing that people, different things that you know that people will pull from. And I've seen lots of interviews with film directors where it's the same kind of thing. Where if they're working on a particular film, they'll like, with the other, they'll get together with their filmmakers, they'll get together with the people who are also working on the same film, and they'll like watch. They'll make a list of certain films that they really love and that they want to be inspired by, and they'll watch these films, but kind of analyze them and see if there's like certain things that they can, kind of take or borrow, or those kinds of things. And I always, think that's I always think that's such a fascinating process. It's like that famous quote, um, you know, good composers borrow, composers steal. I always think that's super interesting. But at the end of the day, that's how I am. Like I think of everything in those terms of like when I'm in that state of mind, I'm just like even more. I have even more of a thirst for those things. So I'm always pulling from those things, and especially from movies and soundtracks. A lot of these movies that I've bought have these great uh, bonus discs of where they're essentially the soundtracks. So that stuff is such a huge inspiration for me, and that's stuff that I've been pulling from, um, lots of different. Uh, you know, uh, I've been acquiring a pretty decent amount of like these old school horror exploitation soundtracks. So like, I've been pulling lots of things from those albums, for as like a template for like some of the things I'm doing with Quantum, especially the newer material. And I just love that process. It just makes me really excited. Um, so, and as far as like the Quantum thing goes, this is like, you know, this is more, today's show is obviously, it's more of a specialty show where I'm kind of just talking about like creative process, the idea of the creative process and how my experiences around it for what it's worth, but then also people that I've, other musicians that I know, and what it's like for them. So this show's kind of more about that kind of thing, and as far as like, and getting back to like where I've talked to a lot of musicians about this very specific subject. I love it because I love certain people that I love talking about it to. I kind of almost like pick their brains because I'm always like fascinated by, you know, what they're pulling from and what is inspiring them. And it's a super fun process. I just think it's continually well, just talking about it with other people inspires me to work, maybe work a little bit harder, or to try to focus in a little bit more on particular things. Like I just think that is where it's at for me. And it's always, I think, part of the whole learning process too. I feel like because you never stop learning, so the more ways that you can explore it in and especially with what I'm talking about with this show, where you're just talking about it with other artists and other musicians and how they process things. Um, I just think it's super interesting, the vastness of how each person handles things differently. Like I had said before, one woman I used to work with who plays music and was very prolific for a long time. She goes through this process of where she kind of closes off the world and doesn't really listen to much music during that time. She kind of just focuses on her own particular thing, and it obviously works for that person. And like for me, it's like completely the opposite, where I'm just like, I want more and more and more. I want more inspiration, so my appetite for film and music will be increased even more so during that time. So pretty interesting. So yeah, and the other thing too I wanted to talk a little bit about with the show is some quantum updates and some developments and some new things that are kind of on the horizon uh, for the band. Uh, so last year, it's hard to believe we're in 2023, but last year we released our fourth studio album, and it's hard to believe. Like I said, we're in 2023, but last year, in June of last year, we released our fourth studio album, "The Stars and sorry, not the stars beneath our feet." In Dreams, I Saw Chapter One, and it was our fourth studio album. And when we recorded that album, which was in January of last year, we we had, and I've mentioned it before in other shows, but we had a lot of downtime where we were not very active. I was on my own, working on the stuff continually, and I ended up for quite a while writing a lot of new material, which was really great. But we weren't rehearsing, we weren't playing any gigs and stuff. So, but then when we got back to it, we to rehearsing, we had a lot of material. And so during that whole year, we acquired a whole bunch of new material. And it had been about uh, three, close to 4 years since our last album. And the album before that was The Stars Beneath Our Feet. And that was the last, like, studio full length album that we put out. So it had been a while, definitely been a while. And then we ended up, having a pretty good run the last year or two, the summer before last and this past summer, where we got back to rehearsing every week and working on all this new material, but we got to play a lot of shows and really worked on the material a lot. And during, after the season was kind of done, especially the summer before last, we realized, wow, we have all this material and we've been kind of working on it for a while. We were fortunate enough to play a lot of gigs, and we kind of reached a point of where Mike Whitehead, who plays bass in the band, we kind of realized, wow, okay, maybe this material's ready, and we have a lot of material. So we decided to, you know, block off a chunk of time and go into the studio and record. So that's what we did. And but then when we were doing the recording and we actually started it, we realized there's a lot of material here. So initially, we were going to do a double album, which initially I thought would be, pretty exciting and a fun thing to try to do. We've never done that before. But on the negative side, I was thinking, well, maybe that's too much. Maybe it's too ambitious. Maybe it's too much music for people to kind of like check out or get into. And maybe it's like, maybe what we could do is record all the music and just kind of break it up, and maybe maybe we could get like two albums out of it, or just focus on one album, just put all the strongest material on this one album, and then call it good, and then just put that out. But then we realized, well, we do have a lot of material, and we're pretty happy with it. So then we just realized at that point, let's just record everything that we have. So that's what we did. We blocked off a couple of weeks, and we did it on on Saturdays, and we just went into the studio and we just recorded basically all the material that we had. And we realized we had a lot of material. So what decided to do, or what I decided to do, instead of releasing it as a double album, we decided to like record two two albums together. So that's what we did. We ended up recording um, all the music that we had, and then we spent quite a while sifting through all the material that we had recorded, and that's when we realized, wow, there is a lot of material here. So then we broke it up, and we made the track listing, and then we separated it, and then it became, oh, okay, so we have two albums. So instead of doing it as a double album, because I thought maybe that's it could be overkill, maybe it's too much. Um, let's like record, or let's just release the first one. And so we decided to do this whole thing of where we divided them up to where it's uh, in Dreams I Saw Chapter One and then Chapter Two. So Chapter One in Dreams I Saw Chapter One came out in June, and we had a CD release show, and it was really great, and it was super fun. And the album sold pretty well. Like I'm pretty happy with how the album has sold. We pretty much sold out of all the physical copies. We had CDs pressed, and then we also like had it. We also have it on Bandcamp and online, and we had an increase in sales for the album online, which has been really great. So so that was a new thing for us. And then what we decided to do was just focus on this album. So, but lately we've been talking about, depending on how things go later this summer, with gigs and booking and all those things and different events, we decided that possibly this year, which I think it's ready to go, and just depending on how the season kind of shapes up, we kind of decided that if it does work out where it's pretty good, or we have like a pretty decent amount of shows, or a couple of shows that might stand out, we're gonna release Chapter Two in Dreams I Saw Chapter Two this year, spring or summer. So we'll see how that goes, and I'm kind of excited about that because we were talking about that not that long ago, Mike and I, because the second chapter to the album, it's kind of a loose concept album, more or less, but and it's kind of all tied together. But we decided to, or we've decided that depending on how those things work out, that since we have this other album that's totally ready and was recorded exactly the same time, it's all mixed and mastered. The artwork is all done. It's basically all ready. We just basically have to actually press them. That's the only thing we need to do. Pressing the artwork, pressing the making the duplicates, and maybe doing a little bit of fine tuning as far as the mastering process, and then uploading it. But basically, it's in the can. It's ready. So we talked about depending how things go this year. Um, if things, if the stars line up, we'll put it out this year. So I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited that we have another album ready to go. And the first album, or the first chapter in Dreams I Saw Chapter One, was about. It's probably about. It's about 45, 50 minutes worth of music. And this next album that we're basically sitting on and just seeing how things play out and whatnot to release it, uh, which is going to be called In Dreams I Saw Chapter Two, is about the same length. It might be a little bit longer, give or take 5 or 10 minutes. It might be a little bit of a longer album. So basically, it's just we just need to press it and then actually put it out there. But it's all ready to go. So I'm really excited that whenever we feel like the light turns green, we can just do it and it's ready to happen and we have something else. And I think there's been, by that time that second album eventually comes out, and I think even by now, because it's been a while, it's been June, it's been about seven months already, which is hard to believe. But I think you know, there'll be enough time to go by. There's probably been enough time that's gone by that it could still maybe be exciting and feel fresh. Um, and I think there'll be enough time for people, who might like the music, to kind of process this stuff a little bit more, as opposed to doing the double album, which is like a whole lot of stuff coming at you all at once. So I think that's what we're going to do. So I'm really excited, and so we're just seeing how things work out this year, with gigs, and then so stay tuned, as we go here into further into 2023, and but I'm really excited about that prospect of doing that. And also the other thing too that I've been working on is I've been writing all of this other material, and I think this could be the next recording project that we do. And I think that this newer material I've been writing, I don't know, it's pretty different than the other stuff that I've been. Then I think it's quite a bit different than the music that's on our last album, the last two albums. I think in Dreams I Saw, which was the album before, which came out about 4 years ago, and also, I mean, sorry, in Dreams I Saw Chapter One, which just came out last year, and then The Stars Beneath Our Feet, which was the album that came out before. I think those albums are pretty different from each other in a lot of ways, and especially since we're sitting on this other chapter of in Dreams I Saw Chapter Two, pretty related obviously to the other album, but it's pretty different. But this new material, I feel like that I've been writing. I started writing a lot of new material in the late summer of last year and the fall of this year and part of this winter. And it's interesting because I feel like the music, it just has a different vibe to it. And it's all like, I feel like this newer stuff that I've been writing is even more kind of interconnected. It's even more of a concept kind of thing. And the music is a little bit more on the ambient side. It's a little bit more, I think, like hip hop influenced. And I think it's a little bit more melodic to a degree too. But it's a different kind of thing. It has like this down tempo kind of vibe. But I noticed after I was writing this material, I was practicing with segueing all of these tunes into each other, like one into the next to a degree, which is something I try to do anyway. But with this stuff, it felt like the newer material was lending itself to that even more, where it felt like each tune was kind of like another chapter or another page in the same book. It was different. So the last couple of months, I've been thinking about, well, maybe, in the future, for like the next recording project for this band, I'm gonna like possibly record, or will possibly record this next album as more of an EP, of where it's gonna be a definite concept oriented album. Concept albums are awesome. I feel like concept albums aren't a thing like they used to be, but I'm a big fan of those. I mean, like great examples of those are like some of the classic Pink Floyd albums, like very concept oriented kind of things, where they're about a certain kind of idea, and each song will tell a different facet of that idea, but they're all like tied together, like literally. And this new material is very much, I feel, in that vein, or is under that umbrella. So what I'm thinking about doing and what we're thinking about doing in the future for like our next recording after we put out chapter 2 is like an EP, basically a concept, a quantum album. It's an EP, and it's a full-on or like a fully realized concept album, and it will be. It's about you know 5 to 7 songs, and I think there's a lot of variety within those tunes, and yet they seem more interconnected than other material, like than how it's related in terms of how that stuff is interrelated. So I'm really excited about that, and that's something that's not going to happen for quite a while, but that's going to be another thing that I've been really thinking about more and more, and I'm more excited about that prospect of like of us doing as Quantum doing a full on like concept album and a shorter condensed like kind of EP where it's going to be just that. So we haven't done that before. I've done that before. I did that actually with the first album that I did under our record label, Berenice Records. I did a rock concept album, and it was all instrumental. And that was definitely a concept album where it was all like kind of connected, and it was like 40 minutes or so of just conceptualized kind of rock. But I haven't done that for Quantum, and I haven't really thought about that kind of thing in a while. But this new kind of thing that's happening is I feel is like really fits itself or lends itself to that. So I'm really excited about the prospect of that. One other thing too that I want at Quantum, and I can talk about it, but I can't talk about it, is there's going to be an announcement in a few months for a really big show that Quantum is now going to be doing, and it was for this big event that we. It's an event that it's been happening in Maine for a few years now. It's a very cool event because the big thing around it is it's really about artists sharing their own original material, and that's kind of the focus of it. And it's a really great kind of event, and it's a really great celebration around it. So, and I'm very excited that we got picked to be a part of it. So that's going to be a real big announcement. So stay tuned for that. That will happen probably in the next month or so, and so I'm very excited about that. So this is Jason Dean. Uh, Thanks for checking out this channel, and please like and subscribe to this channel if you get a chance, and keep the comments coming. We love it. Thank you. Peace.